Tukwe, Annie, bonjour, hi. My name is Lila Cashew, and I'm the Executive Director with the Hondogon Sondoje, the Network Environment for Indigenous Health Research. And we would like to begin this webinar by thanking all of our panelists who've agreed to share with us and with you today the research work that they do. We'd also like to thank all the people who are here in the audience who share our interest in fueling discussions on promising practices that promote research environments by and for First Peoples. We are currently in Tiohtià:ke, unceded Kanien'kehá:ka territory, also historically visited by the Anishinaabe Nation. However, as our audience and panelists come from many places in the territory known today as Quebec, we invite you to share in the chat the Indigenous peoples who have shaped the land on which you find yourself today. And I'll pass it over to Audrey.
Lila. Alors, bonjour, bienvenue au quatrième.
Good morning, good day to the fourth webinar on our new season 2024, who is concentrated in research and context, indigenous context. So we're really happy today to have both panelist groups with us today. Just to recall a little bit, we have put forward different research projects that are completely led by indigenous people, but also different research partnership between different community of different organizations, indigenous organization as well. So as a first,
we have the Youth Network Chair with Indigenous Stream, which will be represented by Natasha Blanchet-Cohen, Véronique Picard, who's the coordinator, and Alicia Ibarra-Lemay, who's a research assistant for the network. I will now give the stage to my dear colleagues, and here we go.
Perfect. I will just share my screen.
Bonjour, hello. Thank you very much for the invitation to share some of our work, the exciting work that we've been doing. It's great to meet new people also. We're seeing people coming in and we're like, oh, we don't know these people. So it's nice to reach out to other members. We're going to share today a little bit about the work that we've been doing over the last 5 years, some concrete example, 3 partnerships that we've done. But before we begin, maybe we can each present ourselves a little bit, which place and position we're coming into this space. Vero?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Véronique Picard. I am a Wendat, a member of the community of Wendake, and I'm also the coordinator of the chair. I'm a PhD student at Concordia University. I've also worked in community setting in Montreal and also more like in the province of Quebec prior to that, and I bring that community knowledge more into that research space, and happy to be here.
And hi everyone, my name is Alicia. I'm a research assistant for the Youth Research Network Chair, the Indigenous Stream, for approximately 4 years now. So I've kind of really seen it grow. I'm Kanien'kehá:ka. My family's from the community of Kahnawake, as well as Chilean. And I'm a master's student at Concordia University. And really, I work with incredible Indigenous researchers, actually here at Concordia, around healing, around Kanien'kehá:ka knowledges, and really a kind of a diversity of subjects, but as well have previously worked as well with the urban Indigenous community here in Tiohtià:ke, alongside actually my colleague Véronique, but also very happy to be here and share some of our work.
So I have the privilege of working with this amazing team. I'm a professor at Concordia University. I teach in the youth work in the Applied Human Science Department. I come in this space as an ally, and I'm guided by the idea of my husband's name that was given to me is Menangulo, which means creating a platform, elevating, supporting. So we wanted to share a little bit around who we are very briefly. So we have an overview slide that gives you some of the pictures of some of the events that we've organized over the last 5 years. Some have, last summer, we organized a summer institute around youth engagement. We've been spending time in the territory. That picture out there is in Manawan with a community co-researcher and a community partner. The Youth Research Chair was it's supported by the Youth Secretariat and was created to support research with Indigenous organizations who have youth action plans. So our partners are organizations, youth, and co-researchers. We have about 25 co-researchers from across Quebec, representing different universities, Anglophone and Francophone universities. Our goal is to inform policy, but also validate knowledges and create alternative tools and methodologies in the process of decolonizing research. Deborah, do you want to add on to that?
I think you said pretty much everything. One of the things that was important, I think you can change the slide. For us at the beginning of, well, for me, when I came in 5 years ago, was the importance of being surrounded by a youth committee. We kind of went the other way, and instead of like being more into an academic research chair, we wanted to kind of step away from that and going to meet with various youth from different backgrounds, different roles within their communities or outside their communities. So we kind of like sent out a call out for any youth that was interested in research, not necessarily experienced in research, but was interested in research. And so we had the chance to have many youth that were part of the youth committee, and their role is to, well, I'll stay on this for now. They have individual roles, but their guiding roles as a collective is to create tools and guide us in the research projects that we do, but also in the practices that we embrace while we do our work. And some of these are the co-creation that we co-created with the youth committee around decolonization of research, around what it means to be an Indigenous youth in today's world, around youth engagement. So all those tools are really guiding our, I guess, our path in different works that we do with the chair. So for the Youth Advisory Committee, we had 4 cohorts of starting in 2019, about 15 youth of 7 different nations. Like I said, they're different roles. And we also, one of the things that was important for us is to involve those youth as research assistant. And some of them had like very important roles in I guess, the success of some research project, because they were important people. I don't know how to say the word, but like in terms of community like relations, we had them with us, and it really changed the way we approach research. So yeah, so those are.
And maybe just to add, if you want to go back to the slide before, each of these postcards has been really important in terms of grounding, advancing, or moving forward our approach to work with youth. So the first one was decolonizing research, like how do you approach decolonizing research? The second one was around Indigenous youth identities. The third one was around well-being at the corner. And the latest one is around youth engagement. So each of these postcards, it would require a webinar in itself to talk about, but just to give you a highlight.
Yeah, we used to have webinars too, but we stopped doing them last year. Yeah, we did it like kind of reorganize ourselves during the pandemic and did a lot of webinars around the different themes that are important for you. So you can check out the website too.
Yeah. And also just to quickly add as well, like this, for us, like our youth advisory committee has really been at the heart of like who we are as the youth network chair, and creating these sort of like these tools that can be used, you know, for so many people, not even just for other Indigenous youth who are sharing kind of similar realities, but as well as, you know, for communities, for different Indigenous organizations. And so it's just been like for us, it's been so like foundational in kind of being able to kind of create this and continue to kind of have this platform for Indigenous youth to express their views, express their perspectives, especially as it pertains to research, because so much of this, as much as sometimes we're talking about, you know, one aspect, let's say, of identity, it, you know, has so many effects within research itself. And then just as well, kind of jump into the actual like examples of some of our work as well. And like Natasha had mentioned, so we work alongside Indigenous youth organizations across Quebec, as well as youth research partners. And so recently, just taking an example of one of our recent projects, was a mapping of Indigenous youth organizations. So with the Youth Secretariat, us as well as, was it 11 Indigenous youth organizations in Quebec were invited to a gathering in Wendake, where we had kind of conversations around each of our roles, kind of just sharing our perspectives and our needs specifically to the youth that we work with. And really was like a 3-day event of being able to kind of share and really get into exactly who we are. Because as much as often we kind of work with some of the same youth, we don't always know each other as well, or get these opportunities to be able to kind of really share some of our kind of common challenges, or even just, you know, common things that we face as, you know, Indigenous youth organizations. And from there, the Youth Secretariat had actually asked us if we wouldn't mind documenting a little bit more of this kind of continuation of getting to know a lot more of these organizations. And so what we did is that we set out to have kind of conversations with each one of them. We actually, in the end, we had 9 conversations. So with, as you've seen, this kind of constellation with 9 of these organizations. And really just kind of getting into, you know, who they are, their history, some challenges, and kind of just talking as well about the things that they do, as a way to kind of create something that can then be shared back to all of them, because this was like a need that they had wanted, and as in a way that like that is also user friendly, that they can be able to kind of navigate it. And so after like months of like these conversations, these kinds of coding processes, and as well of a lot of like back and forth with each organization to make sure that everything was okay, we kind of had come to this tool. We only have 3 images here, but it is like, it is a very big document. And once you kind of get into it, you can kind of click on each organization you want to, and kind of find out a little bit more about them. As well as the things that link us as Indigenous youth organizations and some of the common kind of challenges that we have. And so this will be launched hopefully within the next month or so, first in French, and then we'll have the translation process in English to be able to then launch that as well and create this accessibility for all. And yes, is there anything else you want to mention?
I would just add, I mean, I think this is an example of partnership. So there's like a lot of stuff happening and supporting youth-led organizations, and this is an opportunity to document and to share the landscape. You know, it'll be an evolving document for sure, but as a first kind of layout of who are the actors and what are the commonalities and the areas to work on. So keep posted on the imminent launch. And as another example of a project, so this is another example of a 3-year project that was in collaboration with the ERRSA-Qc-NEIHR, who works with the Innu. So they approached us around supporting, doing some documentation around school perseverance of urban Innu in 3 regions of Quebec. So over three years, we collaborated in doing research. And what was interesting in the next slide was particularly the involvement of Innu students from the different regions as researchers, co-researchers in the process. And I think, you know, one of the quotes is there around just the benefit of being part of the research to validate their own experiences. So that was a really very meaningful process for all of us, and I think ultimately made the research a lot more valid. Another piece that we've really valued in the youth research is around dissemination, the choice of dissemination. Being part of the university, you know, we value academic articles, but academic articles are really only one medium that's very limited, really, in terms of who's going to read it. So each project we focus on finding 3-4 ways of disseminating it. So this is an example where we've got the report, which is going to be useful for the school boards, for the Institut Chateauguay. We have a much smaller document that's much more community friendly with photos, 3-4 pages. And then we had conference presentations. So we presented at the colloque sur la perspective scolaire. And we did webinars. So thinking through really how do you disseminate this research is really important in terms of reaching multiple audiences and really giving back the information to the community actors so that they could use the results of the research. So that's just one example of the many projects that we have undertaken. We wanted to share a little bit around that.
Yeah, and also just like in line with that, like we can maybe share in the chat after, but like on our website as well is where you can kind of find everything, because yeah, like we have, you know, podcasts, we have those webinars that, you know, we had kind of created all of our graphics, not even just for our Indigenous Youth Advisory Committee, but as well as other graphics we've created alongside other partners, other co-researchers.
Videos as well. I think what was interesting in the previous slide is Natasha mentioned there was Innu students, but there's also 2 of them were part of our youth committee, are still part of the youth committee. And then one of them is a youth that we met through our collaboration with another Indigenous youth organization. So all that collaborative work really takes place not only like in the moment, but also in the different opportunities that they have afterwards.
Mm-hmm. And so to just conclude, or sort of some concluding thoughts, that we think a lot about our work and reflect back in our team meetings and some of the learnings around the different partnerships that we've had, that we wanted to connect back some of our thoughts around this postcard that was created around well-being. So I think each one of us had some thought that we wanted to share in relationship to one of these images.
Yeah, like we definitely, you know, we've kind of just showed you like a small little sliver of our work and the kind of things that we do. And so we hope that also interests you, and, you know, you want to kind of take a look at our website or kind of continue to follow us. Because I mean, not only us, but the youth that we work with, you know, do incredible stuff. And we definitely just want to reference, you know, one of our creations that the youth had made, which I think was like so central to, I mean, well-being. It touches upon so many elements, and specifically, you know, this, which we kind of had as this aspect of like, it focused on community care, you know, and kind of getting out of the individual kind of Western approach of care, of well-being. And a lot of these, like, I think words and some of these like things that you see here also are kind of values and approaches that we really use within the chair. And especially like, I think this, like the central piece, the sort of, you know, the canoe in the front that you see, where you have this youth who's kind of, you know, pointing in the front, and a sort of, you know, an elder, family member, community member who's kind of in the back, you know, just helping kind of paddle away. Our sort of approach where we kind of have the youth who are like guiding us, you know, and we're just kind of in the back supporting them in their journey, whether it be through research, education, whether it be, you know, really any kind of relational aspect too. We're there along the journey, and this is like this platform that we're trying to create really to highlight their voices.
It's funny, just thinking, as Alicia was talking, I was thinking about how this creation came to be. And we were having a gathering with the youth committee, and we were talking about intervention, this idea of intervention, how research can inform, or can intervention inform research. And then at some point, you could see like the dynamic of the group, like them not necessarily being, I guess, hooked on it. Yeah. And then at some point, someone said, I don't like the word intervention. I like the word community care. And that's how like the conversation switched and it became what it became. But we always have ideas in mind, but the youth, I think it's creating a space where they feel comfortable in saying that, no, that's not how we should go about it. Another thing I wanted to share for myself, from like the canoe, we were talking about like the many representation of the canoe, what it can symbolizes. And one thing is, it's never perfect. Like you go along the river and you'll find some waves. Someone will fall off the canoe, like all the obstacles that we will face. And that's part of research and having the humility to kind of reobserve our own behaviors, our own attitudes, our own approaches. Like we're talking previously, I had a previous talk about how we can have guides, we can have graphic representation of what kind of approach, what kind of attitudes we need to embrace to do that kind of work. But really it's about diving in with like core values, and always being able to humble ourselves and like reobserve our own like approaches.
Yeah, and I would maybe reflect on the myths around the notion of relationality, which I mean I think is something well known in doing research, part of Indigenous methodologies. But I really feel in this research chair that has been central to all of our work at multiple levels. In a research chair, it's we have the level of the team, our team. We have the interaction with the youth committee. We have the interaction with the researchers who are part of the who are in their academic institution, and then we have the community organizations, and then we have the ministries, and at all these different levels, relationships are really important, and caring for those relationships and creating the proper space for these relationships to be safe, but also to be safe enough to innovate, I think has been something that we've really learned and reflected on a lot. And in each of our events and gatherings, we think we know how to do it, but we can easily slip into standard conventional ways of working, and we realize, oh my God, how come we went that way? So I feel that aspect of the relational piece and really properly caring and nurturing is something that we always need to keep at the forefront, and has been really important. Sometimes we haven't succeeded to the best that we wanted to, but we have to kind of reflect back as a team and move forward with those learnings. So I think for us, that has been over the last 5 years a key element that we've come back to all the time. Yeah. Perfect. So I don't know if that was kind of whether we want to open it up for conversations or hear from our colleagues first and then go into the conversation or questions people have.
If that's okay with you, we'll keep the conversations for the end of the presentations. But I want to thank you for this overview of the work you do. I think it's already a lot, and people, anyways, I've seen some comments about the artwork, but also how knowledge translation is so key in research, and how you seem to be very good at doing it. So anyway, so we'll now give the space to our next panelist. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And I will turn both of my colleagues here. Now I will leave the space to our next two panelists, who are John R. Sillyboy. He's a PhD student in integrated studies in education at McGill, and he's accompanied by his supervisors, Janine Mitalik, who's an assistant professor at McGill University. The research project that they will discuss today addresses developing language that can be recreated or reassigned to include terms related to two-spirit identity, gender, sexuality, and sexual health by integrating a new way of knowledge based on ituapmut. So I will remove myself if I can, yeah, here. And I leave the stage to both of you.
Laliek.
I figured he would he would do that. So I'll go first as John just nudged me a little bit. And I'll introduce myself first in my language. So Nindaluisi Janine Metallic, Ahle we Listiguch, Gespegwagi, Mi'kmaq, Ahnege Wiki Ahedlugwe Ladit Mulyank, McGill University. So my name is Janine Metallic. I'm a Mi'kmaq from Listiguch in Gespegwagi, otherwise known as Gaspé or Gaspésie area. We refer to it as Gespeg or Gespegwagi as part of one of the 7 districts of Mi'kmaq. I currently live here in Montreal and I work as an assistant professor in education at McGill University. And here at the university, I teach courses related to Indigenous education. I also teach, or I have taught Indigenous education to undergraduates. I also currently teach communication in education to undergraduate students who are part of the B.Ed program at McGill. And I also teach a graduate level course called Indigenous Research Methodologies. And so that's something that's new for us at McGill. And I've only taught it twice, but both times it's been very well received. And I like to see the interest from not only Indigenous students, but also, allies and others who are interested in working with Indigenous peoples. And so that's a course where we have a lot of interesting discussions. And as a first language speaker of my own language, Mi'kmaq, I'm interested in research related to Indigenous language revitalization, and especially for Mi'kmaq. And as John's research, you will see in a moment, it's a great example of this, of how we can integrate our language into our work and our research. I also work with Indigenous graduate students from other communities who do research in their own home communities. And 2 other students I supervise are from Kahnawake, and their research involves using their language in some cases, so Kanien'keha, and also looking at the history and the lived experiences of their own community members who are either learning language as a second language or advancing their mastery in the language. And also, as in the case of the other student, she's looking at the history of Indian day schools and doing research, interviewing community members about their lived experiences of Indian day schools. And so that's what I do in a nutshell. I'll leave it now to John to introduce himself, and he'll talk about his research, and I'll join back in, or as John goes along. If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Lalin Janin. Nindaluisi Janar Sudavoy, Awada Bixi, SSONI, Millbrook, Wiki de Tele, Jibukduk. Nego Nasiga, Yasu Deskan, Guedeju Egadi, Mohawk territory. Nego, Eluguea, de Tele, Jibukduk, Nujo de Mam, organization, the Louisiga, Wabanaki Two Spirit Alliance. Maueluguea, Lugaran Alado Dan, Elugue Dan. Akamugi Mijuajis done Delwelo Tijik, Delwisig Hospital, Nadia, the IWK Children's Hospital. Agnono Dossab Nas, one week to Gaha, Agnono Dossab Niala say week to. Nindeluisi, John R is my name. I was going to repeat what I just said in Mi'kmaq. Like Janine, it's really a privilege to be here and be able to share our worldview teachings around being Mi'kmaq or being a knowledge carrier, I guess, or emerging knowledge carrier with this process. And I live in Halifax, but I'm from Eskasoni and Millbrook, and I'm a frequent visitor of Mohawk territory, which is what I was saying. Gwadej are the Mohawk, and and we have a long historical relationship with the Mohawk as sisterly and not so sisterly relations over the years, but ever evolving and very diplomatic at this point in time in our lives. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my slides. And so realizing that we have, let me see if I can open up. Realizing that we have time, and Janine was gracious enough to let me go through some more time with this. I want to look at Eduoptimum again, how we turn using our knowledge and using it together to get more knowledge done. And in this case, it's looking at how, using Eduoptimum is a way of using the strength of our Indigenous knowledge in research. And I'll talk about some of those experiences a little bit. But I'm very privileged also to acknowledge the fact that I come from a long line of knowledge carriers in our community, language speakers and language advocates, and people who preserve our language. My great-great-grandfather was Grand Chief John Denny Jr., who was in Listugush. I brought it 100 years ago, or a little over 100 years ago, to celebrate the 300th anniversary of the baptism of our Grand Chief Membertou that took place in 1610. So that took place in in Listugush, 1910. So that was an amazing experience. And then my great-grandfather died in 1918 eventually. Then it went on to the next grandfather, the great-grand chief, which is Gabriel Siliboy, which is on the right hand here, who's also my great-grandfather. And so I come from this long line of knowledge, I guess, primary source of knowledge, as well as being elders and carriers and knowledge holders, but also ancestral knowledge that's involved with treaty, with governance, with identity, and other aspects of what it means to be Mi'kmaq. I went to Indian Day school, and I often talk about the fact I had no choice but be two-spirited, given the fact that I had to wear sweaters like this and big shirts with big collars. I blame my mother. So my research, basically, besides these research objectives, I want to understand how our culture and language can help rebuild or build positive two-spirit identity within our own Ulnu identity as Mi'kmaq. That's the big overarching thing. And so the big question really is, how should we build knowledge about two-spirit gender identity, sexuality, and sex that creates a sense of cultural pride for people who are two-spirited, people who are young, youth, and people that are trying to find their way as being two-spirited, that would help strengthen their well-being altogether, especially their mental health as two-spirit people. So that was the big thing about this research that I wanted to take on. Knowing the fact that we've been impacted by so much of historical and also political policies, different things that have affected us as two-spirit people in the region. In fact, we don't have a word for two-spirit in Mi'kmaq. We don't have many different words that were impacted because of the impact of things that came from Europe at that time. But there were also positive things. And we have to recognize there were other things that affected us, and we had to evolve as Mi'kmaq, as Ulnug. Ulnug is the word that we use in our language. Mi'kmaq is a word that was sort of anglicized, or was a French word perhaps, or one combination of another, but it turned into something that we would have said Nigamaw, but it didn't turn into Mi'kmaq, or even Mi'kmaq. But we know that our worldview didn't include words like racism, homophobia, or transphobia. These are, of course, contemporary words, but I also play on the fact that they are Western constructs. What I'm trying to get at is using Eduoptimum, or using our language, or my primary source of all my knowledge, first and foremost, comes from being who I am as Olnu, being Mi'kmaq. And so anything that comes into mind also comes into how I would look at it from our worldview first, before I even use English. And I would also look at how that would break down into what our language would say about different things. So when I look at this, I'm trying to say Geruaptum or Geruaptum Wulaguluzuan dan delida sig Delia Kaptumug Goi net two-spirit. So what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to look at what two-spirit is using our language and culture, right? And so the term two-eyed seeing had come from elders Albert and Merdina Marshall, who I call Glamuxis Asugwis, because they are closely related to us, but not, Albert is an advisor and elder on my PhD committee, but he's also was my neighbor. I grew up with him all around me, and he was there all the time. Merdina was just an aunt that we, looked at as an aunt in the neighborhood, but also was closely related. He's my father's first cousin. She's my father's first cousin. And so we knew each other since we were, since I was a child. So I never really knew them as Elder Albert and Elder Merdina. We just call them Sugwis or Galamuxis, which is uncle. So Albert and Merdina had coined the term two-eyed seeing, but it's been that concept of Eduaptimuk has always been there. It's in our language. It's something that we always know what it is. And when I discuss it with Janine, we speak in Mi'kmaq when we get together. And when I share this information, I always share it saying it'd be so much easier if people spoke Mi'kmaq in our world, so we wouldn't have to go through all this publication process. But it is what it is. But we do understand that two-eyed seeing, from what I've understood in the research that I've done in speaking with Glamuxis Albert, it's a way of being and living for Olnu to address a world evolving in rapid flux. Basically, we had to evolve since the time of contact to integrate worldviews of other areas or perspectives that came from the Europeans. For example, spirituality, for example, language, for example, their policies, for example, their way of looking at our world. So we had to integrate how they see us, and we had strengthened our way of being as well by understanding those perspectives. But not everybody understands that two-eyed seeing is a continued effort for both parties, all parties, to make sure that they're involved in trying to understand from each other's worldview and perspectives. Most people think it's just Indigenous people that have to adapt the Western perspectives, when it, in fact, is both ways. Mi'kmaq, as Janine had mentioned, is this area here. I come from Cape Breton, which is this area here, Eskazoni, and moved to Millbrook, and then and I've been in all over this area, everywhere. So as you can see, the Gaspé region is part of Mi'kmaq, and that's why we're part of Quebec-NEIHR as well. Eduaptimuk, like I said, it's a knowledge based on our way of looking at the world, but also Western perspectives. And so it's a merging of the ways of knowing from both areas to enhance the sight of something that we're trying to look at. And I've used that as a methodology or as a framework or as an approach or a concept. In fact, I don't necessarily divide up Eduaptimuk as a methodology or a conceptual framework. They're one. It's inherently all of those things at the same time, which is very difficult to for Westerners to understand, because one of the things in reviewing all the literature about Eduaptimuk, Olnu, us Indigenous people, know that our strength in our language and our culture and our ways of knowing, our knowledge and worldview is intact. It's circular. It's inherently relational in its way of moving. It's continuous. It's ever evolving. And the thing is, we don't classify our knowledge under those classifications like Westerners do. And so it's very, and that's because we maintain the sacredness of who we are through, our sources of our knowledge, like Aduan, like Guluzuan, like knowledge and like narratives, like stories, like oral tradition, like science, our knowledge of the land, all of those things, we know what they are, and they're all interrelated. We don't necessarily pull them apart. And for people who are doing Eduaptimum in their research, often the biggest mistake I think people often make is that they try to classify it differently. I can, to a certain degree, say it's a methodology because it's this. I can say it's a conceptual framework because it's this, or it's a combination of those things because it's this. And I have to explain that in my dissertation at the same time. I would rather I don't. I would just say it's intact as it is, and that's the way it divides into that knowledge process. In doing so, I published a paper based on research that I had done with the IWK Children's Hospital on children's pain. And we had studied and learned with our community how to understand what pain narratives were. And we used art-based methods to understand what they were, stories. And we also did sharing circles and talking circles to understand how children express pain. And out of that came a paper that identifies the ways in which we should be doing research and identified how Eduaptimum could be applied. But Eduaptimum in these cases is what I understand it to be. I designed this this diagram that you see here as part of how these things happen. So we have core values, they're based on core values. We have capacity development that, you know, goes along with the fact that we have capacity that's in the community, but also from our knowledge source, we're teaching the world outside of our community what it means to do Eduaptimum. We developed a research design based on a community involvement completely. The knowledge you talk about in action, for example, when you talked about the previous group talking about how knowledge is developed and translation of that knowledge. Well, we often understand that youth, for example, who are involved in the active process of researching or knowledging, they are immediately getting research experience actively, but they're also learning what's going on, and that relational involvement with the community, that sense of kinship, that sense of relational approaches to how we develop knowledge is all mobilized through that knowledge process. Then, of course, we have protocols and we have our 7 sacred teachings, which I'll just allude to in a second. I developed this module here, and I won't go into much detail because it is the strength of the one I. This is all in Mi'kmaq. I haven't translated it. I have a version in English, but I didn't share it anywhere yet. But it is a combination of our sources of knowledge, for example. An example would be Deloptimeg is like how we see things. Dan Delotim means how we are as Mi'kmaq. And then the 7 sacred teachings are here that belong with love, honesty, truth, etc., etc., etc. And then where we come from in a framework of earth knowledge, how we look at the world, how we look at knowledge being translated, and how we have belief systems that are involved in there. And then, of course, we have the world around us, like the sun, the moon, and the earth, and of course, us as Mi'kmaqi in the center. So that's something that I've explained in the candidacy paper 1 that I need to defend, and Janine is looking at that with me. Coming out is a part of the life cycle is another paper that I've published based on two-eyed seeing and understanding what two-spirit coming out process is. But Glamux's Albert here is the one that's been helping me from, well, all my life, and then also during my academic life, how to look at how two-eyed seeing can be used to do research for two-spirited people. And then the application of Eduaptimum, if you look at it here, basically we have the Westernite. It has a literature review, has the surveys, the videos, the data gathering, the dissertation, the knowledge translation, which is slower through public journal publications, for example. It's a longer process. The healing is developed into a strategy as part of the outcome. And then healing can be immediate for the individual researcher if we look at it from this area. In the Ulnuwe knowledge, or from our worldview, we know that oral traditions are based on those stories and narratives and lived experiences. That's our primary source of knowledge. So I use Ulnuwe Sudi my language as the primary source of that knowledge. So I delve into vocabulary and terms and words, and some words that may not exist anymore, but I'll touch base on that in a second. We have, of course, elders and knowledge carriers input into that process. We have a culture and analysis using, for example, the the four directions model, or some people may call it the medicine wheel. Community validation is we make sure that it's always a process of going back and forth. What Albert says that we have to do is make sure that the knowledge is authentic, sacred, and accurate. I expand on that in the candidacy papers, which means that we can't pull apart this knowledge as easily as a lot of people classify, for example, data, and they numerically quantify data in a certain way so that it's classified, it's termed, it's pulled apart, and then each part is seen as an individual process, whereas we do not do that when it comes to their stories. We try to make them maintain their sense of integrity and their sense of sacredness if we make sure that we keep that together. The knowledge that we have from the side of Indigenous knowledge that we're putting into process is that it is translated immediately through language, story, and sessions. For example, I was trying to say in the chat earlier that youth that are involved in research, if they're speaking with elders, if they're speaking with knowledge carriers, they're immediately learning, and also the knowledge mobilization from elder to youth is taking place immediately. So we don't have to wait for a publication a year later for that to happen. It's immediate, it's personal, it's relational, it's one-on-one or one-on-one to a collective, but it's impacting the community right away. That's most important when it comes to looking at Edwaktum. And then healing is also taking place immediately. So in the collective setting, as we're doing the research, as we're sharing these stories, and stories are part of that healing process. That's what we've seen Two-Spirit people deal with when it comes to, for example, sharing coming out stories. And I share that the coming out stories had been part of the healing for people to identify as Two-Spirit people in dealing with their gender and sexuality, or even their sexual health. And so some of the things that we've come up with is, in revitalizing and resurfacing words, the terms for sex and human parts have come to the surface again. And so these words that we're looking at, for example, are words that aren't used. They've been used as colloquial words or words that mean some sort of swear word or cuss word. So penis is Sizigan, but when somebody says, Sizigan, they sort of giggle because it's been I'd say it's been affected by Catholicism, that all of our words were then used as swear words, right? So misdone, for example, sometimes people call somebody misdone. You're a testicle. It's kind of funny to say that, but you also say that in Mi'kmaq, and you call somebody misdone. So the thing that's happened is that these words now, as I'm looking at them and I'm validating them with elders and knowledge carriers, they're saying, no, those are the words that we seriously should be using as body parts. And that's what we're doing with this project, and this research that I'm doing is trying to surface these words so that we could use them back into our everyday language as parts of the body, but also ways that people would understand what they are. A lot of these words, a lot of people don't know what they are, right? So mbuskun, for example, or umlagajum, those are words that have been used as, for example, tits in a colloquial sense, but it's not used for what it was, which is the source of food for a child, right? For where the milk comes from, for example. And so the other thing that I've done in the research since doing this project is to understand that our survey could be developed in a circular approach. And I've used the approach 3 other times so far, and I'm going to use it as part of my methods. And so I'll talk about this in my methods section, where the circular approach to doing research using this model is to understand that there's a circular approach to integrating or talking with people in our community. So if we were to have a session that has to do with, for example, doing interviews, I would follow this method. But I also use that method for doing the survey, online survey. I categorize it so that people would know in each section what to expect. I mean, I don't give them this model, but that's the model we follow as Two-Spirit research happens. So I would say, for example, in positioning myself, I would say Nina Johnar, or I am Johnar. And I would say Wenikish, or who's your mother? And who are your people? Who are your family? I would say Winikigama. And those are introductory phrases that we use in everyday language. Like when you meet somebody for the first time, these are the types of things you say. That's how you position yourself first. And so we identify who we are, but in the Western sense, it's like that introductory phase, right? So you identify who you are, you're giving your positionality. And then you also make sure that in this stage, you provide trigger warnings at this stage. Like you say, we got to be, this is the idea for this is the intent, but we have to know that, there are going to be things that are uncomfortable in this discussion. The next stage is going into the stage where we talk about our well-being, our wellness, or how we are. So dajigamik is the word that we have for to be healthier, how you are in your wellness. So, I would say dajigamen, like, how are you? Like, how are you doing well? And so we then is entering the phase of looking at health data and impacts like mental health and experiences. We're starting from this stage to next stage. So if this is 1 hour long, this would be the first 15 minutes, then we go into the next 15 minutes, which would be around here. Like, let's talk about some of the areas. And I'm saying this as a Western way, saying that these are approximate timeframes, but really I wouldn't divide it into 15, 15, 15, and 15. It would be just a way that the natural tendency of conversation to take place. In the next section, then we go into more deeper analysis of how your health is. And this is where we would talk about, like the word dalia is a colloquial word now. How are you doing? It's like, what's up, dalia? And so this is where this is where the conversation is taking place, and it's starting to look at more, in-depth analysis of how the health is of a Two-Spirit person, for example. So what are those coping mechanisms? What works for you as a Two-Spirit people dealing with mental health, for example? So that's how I designed my interview guides. And then the next part is the part where we're going into the spiritual realm, where I make sure that I stop asking all of those delicate questions that I've asked in the mental and emotional area. Now I'm asking people to tell me about, how do we move forward? What have we learned? And this is where I say, Gedu Aptumug, Uchid Naji Welo Domino, Udanaminal. So I'm saying, like, how do we work together to make sure that our communities are doing well, or how our people are doing well? So these are safe questions where people feel empowered and make sure that they're feeling spiritually lifted, that they're going to take part in this. And I don't let them drop with a hard question to ask about their mental health here, or even, I would never approach anything that has to do with, for example, suicide or suicide ideation in any of these conversations. It may arise, but I've not triggered it. This is something that I have to take into consideration, that it's got to be strength-based. It's got to be trauma-informed. It's got to be based on empowerment and uplifting ways of looking at how we are and who we are as Two-Spirit people. So I've designed this. We used it in a couple of publications already, and I don't have a model question to it yet, but somebody say, we got to copyright this. And well, that's not how we do things. It's just something that I'll share with our NABOC community and make sure it shares with other areas. The other way that we're looking at how we are as Two-Spirit people is to look at, let's say, oral tradition to understand some of the teachings that may exist. So one of the things that you can see here is that Glooskap in their adventures had, one of the things that they did is that they encountered a family, and they sent this family off to find divide the family to 7 groups. And each of those 7 groups have to divide into, let's say, a community, what that would look like. So I was just taking this oral tradition as for fun, and to see how we would look like if we were to divide it into 7 contemporary families, something that we can teach our people and young people how that would look. And so we have, let's say, these families here. We had, family 1 being male and female, family 2 being female and male, family 3, male to female and male, female to male and female, male to male, female to female. These are examples of things that you can do and reteach youth, which is more contemporary about what is being two-spirit in that sense, using oral tradition or things that are there. And so I'm exploring that and seeing how that would turn out within children eventually. But I'm not going to integrate children into my study at this point, but it's something that we could do for curriculum development. When we do that, then, I came to the conclusion, do we even have to use words? Do we have to use language to find out who we are? Perhaps we can use hieroglyphics like we did here. Two-spirit can identify using the way we write, and it represents the terms for gender and sexuality variance. We have a central being here that's ungendered, and they're looking up into the sky, of course, and they're grounded at the same time. And we just doubled it as in two spirits. That's how it's used in actual terminology when people started writing hieroglyphics, for example. And so the symbol represents the entity of spirit that you don't see, but you understand it's there. It's ungendered and it's non-binary. So in my study, I'm just saying, we don't have to necessarily look at words. It could be symbols like this. And that's what the Two-Spirit, Wabanaki Two-Spirit Alliance uses for that. So in coming down to the conclusions here, I wanted to understand, okay, so does our research, the development of the research project, is it applicable within a partnership? Yes. For us, we've been collaborating, me as a researcher, but also me collaborating with various institutions like the Wabanaki Two-Spirit Alliance. I'm a founder and I'm the executive director of the organization, but I also work with Eskasoni First Nation, the health center there, in collaborating with our research and also with various other organizations around the region. Some of the challenges, there's so many. There's funding, there's timelines, there's people not understanding what two-spirit is, or people not understanding what two-eyed seeing is, or eduoptimum. They're really stuck with the Western perspectives of doing research rather than understanding what we are trying to do as researchers, and making sure that our community is continually working towards different goals. And one of the things that we've come up with is that we're developing, for example, a two-spirited ethics protocol framework. And that's been invaluable in trying to determine the self-determination of two-spirit research so that we don't have to go with, let's say, Western ways of doing things, or we don't have to always even follow other ways of doing our research. We can protect our own research in the way that we're trying to develop those protocols. And that's what we're doing as the Wabanaki Two-Spirit Alliance. There are many successes for us and repercussions. One of them is that, we're always trying to find out what it is that we're trying to get and what it is we're trying to understand in the region. And one of the things that I see happening all the time is the sense of people trying to undermine our research a little bit, saying that it's, you got to follow a certain way, an academic way or Western way or different ways. And Janine is always supportive in saying, no, we don't have to follow those ways. We have to follow our ways. That's the primary source of our knowledge. First is to look at what we know in our culture and language, and then transform it and translate it into ways that other people understand. And so that's been very helpful for me doing this research and making sure that we try to move it forward. So that's my research at this point.
Thank you so much for this very thorough presentation. And language is such an important part. We were talking about this week, Leila and I.
I know I went fast.
No, don't worry. I don't know if you're aware of but probably the book Post-Colonial Queer.
Yeah.
It was a book. It has international writers, and how the word homosexual was invented in the 19th century. And Western researchers have used this were to look into other people's literature or language, and they're like, well, it didn't exist before, so it's just it didn't exist in those communities, but it's just a word in our language. I mean, in my own language, it doesn't mean that there were not other words in other languages to describe those various realities.
Yeah.
So language is such an important part.
One of the things that I've explained in doing this research, I've just started off with what is Two-Spirit first and foremost from way back when. And so one of the things that happened was that when I started looking at it in my master's, what is Two-Spirit and conceptualizing Two-Spirit from a Mi'kmaq worldview, I realized one was that we didn't have these words in our language currently. That doesn't mean that we don't understand what being Two-Spirit is. We do have people who are Two-Spirited in our communities who may express themselves in a different gender identity, or may live in a way that's different within their sexuality. They may be related or may not be related. But we know, for example, we would say if there's not a word, they'll say, how John is, or how Duma is, or they'll relate to the person who they know. And they may not know what the word is, or they may just use English words at this point, because English words have been so, that they're all very, very contemporary words, and they're always they're emerging in an alphabet of acronym that's about this long now, right? But get the acronym, by the way, thanks to our organization, and I presented at the Interpride in 2015, and I said, Two-Spirit should be at the beginning of all the acronyms in Canada. So Interpride Canada said, oh, that makes sense to us. So they moved it to their acronym. And then I lobbied strongly with EGAL Canada, with Two Spirits in Motion, with other national organizations to do the same thing. And then eventually, a couple of organizations around here that knew us as Wabanaki Two-Spirit Alliance, they immediately started putting Two-Spirit at the beginning. And then in the last couple of years, I was working on the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Two-Spirit the cost of justice report. And in the Two-Spirit document, we said that Two-Spirit has to be at the beginning, 2S has to be at the beginning of the acronym. And then finally, Canada, working with Women in Gender Equality and with History and Culture and different ministries at that level, have adopted it as 2S at the beginning. So when government adopts it as 2S at the beginning, then it translates into Two-Spirited documents everywhere else. So, public policy has to follow what government follows. And so, yay, we finally have Two-Spirit at the beginning of all the acronyms. And that was from our advocacy here. And we've been pushing that internationally now as well, because it hasn't been included in the acronym in the US side yet, but we're busy working with the Two-Spirit communities there and the organizations there. But something that significant is important. Why? Because now in Census Canada and in Statistics Canada and different data capture tools where it says queer or it says LGBTQ, or it sometimes just says two, it doesn't specifically identify Two-Spirit. And if it's not identified as Two-Spirit, then we're undercounted. And if we're undercounted, we're not in policy, we're not given resources, and we're put under the umbrella as queer, and under queer, it's just a very white term, right? It's very westernized, it's very white, and it's very cisgendered male as well. And so those types of things that we have to actually tear apart, not break apart. And we had to do that as an organization, but I've been very successful in that process across Canada, and people have been trusting us in our movement towards there. And so, it's helping determine how that would impact policy, resources for policy, and making sure that stats keep us counted as well, because it's been too much erasure of Two-Spirited people already everywhere, right? Because of the colonial impacts and heteronormative practices that are out there. An example would be the Indian Act. Indian Act, for example, obligated people who are male, let's say if they were male-to-male relationships or female-to-female relationships before, Indian Act says that we recognize male and female as the couple, right? And then that is And they took away female, if they married white male, for example, they took away their identity, and that impacted a whole generations of people. And then these are some of the things that we have to make sure that we try to avoid. But that's what we're working towards. And this is why it's important that 2S and all these other things are counted. So that's why our research is important as well.
I'd like to open the space now for Q&A. So if people have questions, comments, I think it's a good time now to ask them. And I will open the questions by asking, because both projects represent two groups that are often forgotten in funding. A lot of the Two-Spirit funding is for AIDS, from what I've seen at the government level, and youth often don't have a lot of funding for their organizations, programs, unless they fall into a deficit-based category. How do you think your projects underline the importance of funding programs, organizations, for Two-Spirit for youth that is outside of a deficit-based language? Is my question clear? Let me know if it is not.
Thank you, John, for a wonderful presentation, really insightful, and I really the importance of language and how we can, revitalize, come back to the language to bring to terms all these points you're mentioning. I really appreciate the work, and I look forward to reading your PhD. I'm not sure I have an answer to your question, Andre, but I would say that the importance of doing like the research that we're doing, the research that John's doing, that is really about shifting the language and the approach, and working from a strength-based approach. I think that is slowly feeding into the type of funding calls for funding that are coming out. We work with, in the case of our project, we work with the ministry and the youth secretariat, and their calls for proposal are becoming more strength-based, and they are supporting more Indigenous youth-led organizations. And I think, there's probably, from the interviews that we did, for instance, in the mapping project, there is a lot to be done in terms of how funding requirements are for youth-led organizations who don't necessarily have the human resources and all the financial reporting processes. So I think things are evolving, but there's definitely a work in order to change, modify the way that funders are, the requirements that they're asking. It's a different form of language, but there needs to be a much more openness in terms of the language and the requirements from the level of the proposals, the calls for proposals, the flexibility, and the accountability. And there's different forms of looking at accountability. So I think that's what I would say that's emerged from the projects that we've done with organizations here in Quebec.
I can just add a couple of things. Interesting enough, a lot of folks don't know. People get, I think, confused with two-eyed seeing and two-spirit research because the word two throws them off. And if it was in my language, there wouldn't be those two words in there, first and foremost. And the funny thing is, when I was writing these proposals for my PhD, for example, and I did get funding through ERRSA, but I had been nominated Vanier and Trudeau from Montreal, from McGill, both in first place, I think it was, going to the organizations. And I don't think they understood exactly what I was trying to get at with my research, because I think they were stuck with the two. That's what I estimate. And coincidentally, the person that I had been up against in the Vanier here had gotten there because they also are collaborating with me on pain research in a different area, and they got the Vanier, or the Trudeau, I should say, and recently had not finished their PhD. And so that confusion is very much about who we are as Ulnug and how we look at our research from a primary source of knowledge is not well translated into proposals and or funders. It would have been easier if I would have said, I'm doing research based on queer theory or something like that, and then that would have been an easier way. But it's not about being easy. It's about being legitimate and spiritually inclined towards our knowledge. And so, that doesn't translate well into proposal writing. So sometimes I have to use the language of the folks. For example, when you're writing the proposals, you're stating a fact. Two-Spirit people are impacted by colonialism, and youth are the ones dealing with mental health. That's your opening statement. That captures the audience. The next question, because it's deficit-based, that's what Canada's built on about Indigenous people. All our deficit perspectives of health, our chronic health, our mental health, our obesity, our, all of these things that have to do with addictions. Those are the things they like doing. And then we're providing a solution by saying, however, in my research, I would like to use language and culture to identify how we can rebuild they love that bullshit. They really do. And so and then they don't read the rest of it because they want to see the opening statement so strong, and then I'm providing a solution through my research. And if I start making it fancy by saying edu optimum can this and that and everything, then they just get, they get confused. So I know how the game works. So I know how to capture funding from a deficit language use. But when it comes to using the research dollars, we don't use it. We don't use that language. We transform the language back into what it is, about building, about being who we are, celebrating your identity. That's what I'm not going to get research dollars if I say, I'd like to build identity about being Mi'kmaq youth based on our gatherings and dancing and culture. They're not going to say, well, they're going to say, oh, well, that's a great thing. Why should we provide money for you? Where's the problem? So that's the challenge when it comes to proposal writing, is that you have to play their game. And I can do it really well. We've brought in, all kinds of money for our organization here because at McGill, I learned how to play state the problem, give them a solution, and give them the recognition that they need, and then we'll get the money. I've been very successful at getting that money, but it's not very successful in making sure that we continue with core funding. And that's the situation here. Because to them, somebody had said earlier, you said, I think a lot of folks are put under mental health or put under deficit sources of funding that have to do with different things. In fact, when we had gatherings here, and when we have our chiefs and our communities and community health directors, we send them the note saying we want a Two-Spirit person to be funded by your community. They say, oh, the only funding that we have is mental health dollars. What happened to positive money about cultural identity and language and being pride, using pride money, not being pride as in pride queer, about being proud about your identity. We don't have that type of money out there. About we have things that have to do with TRC calls to action, justice calls to action, anything that has to do with looking at rebuilding our problems. And that's where the money is. Because if it's about celebrating our well-being and our identity, there's no money for that. That's ironic.
Did you want to add something, Veronique?
Oh, no, we're just all agreeing with that.
And what about you, Janine?
I just want to add that John brought up a number of good points related to how our research is presented, especially with respect to funding and for government agencies to recognize the type of work that we do and whether or not it's worth funding or not. And so what I want to say is that this is part of the work that I'm trying to put forward also within the universities, is that we do have our own methodologies. And so when I'm teaching a course like Indigenous research methodologies, it's not to give them a prescribed, you know, students might come in expecting a prescribed way of doing things, so that's quote unquote Indigenous, but they quickly realize that the point I'm trying to put forward is that it depends on which nation you come from, or it depends on the community, but it also is really shaped by the language. It's really shaped by our traditions, our practices. And so it's not a one size fits all for everyone when it comes to Indigenous research methodologies, which is why I make it plural. The other thing is that it is often looked at as deficit focused. And so I try to, when I'm working with students, also not just the students I supervise because they already know, but other students who I teach within the Faculty of Education, I try to teach them that Indigenous research is not all negative. It's not all doom and gloom. We have a lot of strengths in our communities, and language is one of them. You know, the practices we have, our relationships within community, those are things that we need to build upon. And so that's what I really try to give them, is also that alternative perspective, because often they're not getting that from anywhere else, really. And so to have that built into our programs for teaching not only graduate students, undergraduates as well, but also teaching our colleagues, because our colleagues are the ones who sit on these review committees and who are, you know, determining who's getting funding or not. And fortunately, I've had that opportunity to be on a couple of review committees, including the one for the Vanier most recently. And I find that it's good that they have Indigenous representation, but it's still very much a minority. So I'm maybe the only person on the entire committee, but I'm hoping that over time as we sensitize others to what Indigenous research could look like, that we can actually fund a variety of research, types of research with our communities and our nations that are not all deficit based, and so that actually work to our strengths, and so that we also lift ourselves up. And so this is why I love supervising students such as John and others who really know that. We know it because we lived that experience. I lived it as well in community doing research. And so I'm trying to bring that into the academic spaces. That's all I want to add.
See, that's why I have her as a supervisor. And not only that, we're probably one of the only supervisor roles that we have that we speak the same language. It's very rare.
That's an added plus. It's nice to have conversations with John in the language, so it's it just gives a different sense to our supervisor meetings. And I just want to make a shout out that I think we have one of your committee members here too.
Oh. It's almost like a defense here. It's a preview.
Yeah. Does anyone else have questions, comments?
I was going to say, I also saw in the chat that Renee was sharing some information about
Michelle Bishop.
yeah.
No.
No,
Oh.
that's me who put that in.
Oh, okay.
Hey, John.
There we go.
So I was a little bit triggered. I'll drive out your comment about HIV funding. So I've worked in the HIV sector for a long time, but our youth council raised the same concerns about we're always at risk, and being an Indigenous youth should not be a risk factor, right? It's the environments that we live in. It's the spaces where we make our lives that create risks for us. And so this was back in 2015, and we did some research around what are the alternative languages and words. And so that's partly why I'm so excited about the KT resources that you were presenting earlier, because I think that we could have done a lot more KT, but one of our resources was this fact sheet that I loaded up. And again, it was just that saying, like, we are so much more than risk.
and there's so much more context to that. So it's been such an inspiring presentation by all of you. Thank you very much.
You wanted to say something, Howard?
No, I kind of just wanted to say hi and that the presentation was very thorough, and I love when people talk about flipping and reframing the disparity lens, because it's such an important change of the dominant narrative, and it needs to be done everywhere in every space, and to show our perspective and how we approach research in our communities in such an organic way, because our traditional knowledge holders are the first experts. I think it's such it came across so beautifully in your work, John. So it's very nice to see you, and I just wanted to make that comment. I don't have any questions. I'll save that for the defense.
Could I just share a quick story about what Sarah had said? I belong to the Chronic Pain Network. Thanks to our research that we've been doing in partnership with Eskasoni, with Millbrook First Nation, St. Mary's First Nation, Lennox Island, and a few other nations across Canada. And we've been privileged to have experiences that captures strength-based approaches to understanding who we are and pain narratives. And I went to a presentation in one of the chronic pain meetings. And so I had an audience around me as I'm explaining two-eyed seeing and research, doing pain research and chronic pain research. And one of the researchers at this meeting says, "Oh, so you do qualitative research?" You know, and it was a dig at that we're not doing clinical-based trials of research. And so, and there are very well-recognized international psychologists in this area. And so I said, explain yourself. What is it that you're trying to ask or make a statement on? He goes, no, I just want to know, what evidence do you use? And I said, oh, well, we have thousands of years of knowledge and science that we use to understand the analysis behind this. And he says, and so two-eyed seeing gives you that understanding. I said, no, our primary source of language and knowledge and science of who we are gives us what we know. What we enhance it is your Western-based knowledges. He goes, and so how do you explain? Anyway, so they were just trying to like do the Socratic method. And I said, well, let me ask you. I said, where did you train? He says, oh, I went to, I think it was McGill at the time. And I said, and where did you get your degree from? He goes, oh, and then I did my advanced degree in this. And so your Western-based training is based on just Western-based ways of understanding what you're looking at for your patients and patient engagement. Yes, I've been trained in this and publications and that. I said, so it's not really your fault that you don't understand the other side of your deficit in your knowledge. I said, I have the advantage that we have your Western-based practices that we've been imposed on, and we know it, and we're teaching it, and we're using it to our research. But I primarily use our research and our knowledge for that. And I said, so it's not really your fault that you have deficit training in this area. And I had the advantage that we have the knowledge that we have to have when it comes to understanding our Indigenous youth. And so he didn't understand, he didn't know what to take from that. He was just so flabbergasted that I dismissed his sense of psychiatry and psychology degrees, and that I called it deficit because he was in the disadvantage of not having two worldviews to understand our world. I said, that's the advantage we have as Indigenous people. And so, and there was an audience at this, and there was an audience in favor of what I was saying. And the funniest thing is, as the only Indigenous person doing pain research across Canada and with this organization, if you know Big Bang Theory, and in Big Bang Theory, you see Penny, the blonde girl with the researchers that are in the group. That's often me, Penny, in the chronic pain world, with all these psychologists, psychiatrists, medical doctors, PhD nurses, and all this stuff. And I'll bang away at them at this level because I come from that primary source of knowledge and had that advantage. And I use that as my source of knowledge, along with Western-based knowledge. And I throw that at them all the time when they start to be like that. And so they don't know what to think of me, but I sort of make fun of the fact that I'm penning the room with a bunch of scientific researchers, but really I'm not. they're the pennies in the room when it comes to understanding Indigenous ways of doing and knowing and living.
Well, thank you so much for all our panelists today. You know, the Youth Network Chair, and obviously you, John and Janine, your supervisor, presenting your projects. We will end the webinar for today, and enjoy your day and the cold weather coming. Hopefully you'll be able to take advantage of the snow for once this winter for a couple of days.
And
So see you next month.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, bye everyone.